Hi all, we're here today to talk a little bit about consumer perception. And we were rehearsing this morning, and I said, oh, what a better way to start than to give you a little story about our VP of marketing. She told us, well, I asked her, how should we dress for this event? And she said, well, we want you to dress comfortably.
Yeah.
As if you're going to be following the opening of a great opening by the Google head of research, and this is what we came up with.
Yeah, and I did change something about my normal attire, right? So I wore a rose here, and I did it because of New York, right? It's we're in a theater district. I decided to add a little touch of style and romance to what I might normally wear to the office. You guys tell me what you think. But
last time we did this in Vegas, I had to hide his prop, so we'll just keep that here in the pocket. So let's go ahead and get started about some of the inspirations behind this paper came from some of your industry icons and people that we look up to. People like Seth Godin, who tells us that brands like Apple, they resonate because they provide meaning. And what changes our mind is we change our mind when something moves us, that moves us on an emotional level, and it provides that meaning. We also think very highly of Kahneman's ability to take that system 1 and system 2 thinking and move it into the behavioral economics. And we believe that that system 1, which is really about when I make decisions, I'm doing it on my gut. I'm doing it on my perception, on my emotions, versus system 2, which is more thought out and systematic. We found this very interesting from your own Rubenson, who's asking things like, what is it that your brand owns, they truly own, and that no other brand does? In the minds of the consumer. And so we view one of the things that we're doing around consumer perceptions as a way of modeling your value in the brand. Then we have our friend Brian Solis, who's talking about the age of digital Darwinism, where there's a disconnect between the brand and the consumer. And we can view this as either a lot of static, or we can say that the web gives every consumer the megaphone. We just have to learn how to listen to it. In this case, we're showing that 78% of North America is now digitally connected. We have companies like Google who have led and shown us how we can take a lot of data that traditionally we believe to have very little, if no, structure, and add structure to it and make meaning of it. We've seen companies and projects like Wikipedia, where open data and linked data is then merged with this highly unstructured data, and this emergence and convergence is something that we're taking advantage of. To piece together these consumer mental models, or these perceptions that we're going to talk about next. And to do this, I'll hand it over to Sean Parker. And we're going to go through our case study, which is in the luxury fashion retail space. Sean?
Okay, thanks, John. All right, so I'm here to talk a little bit about dialects, right? So here are the two principal communities in any conversation. We talked about advertising, right? You have the consumer and the brand, and we can subdivide this many different ways. The highest level, and then, but we'll use this fashion example to talk about the differences in dialect, right? Which is just a variation of language. I'm just going to pick one out. You guys can read this. There's tons of these kind of examples. But I want to talk a little bit about the figure flattering one, right? Especially in fashion, but in the whole idea of consumers want to connect emotionally to your brand, right? And with something like fashion, it's all tied up in mental image, mental model, and in body image, right? So the term, when the consumer looks for something that's figure flattering, which I'm sure this is not doing for me, but they're looking, that's their interpretation, right? But in fashion, high fashion in particular, the brand offers you the term precision tailored. And unless you're an expert consumer, you don't make that connection, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that, but this is where we're playing. We talk about connecting the dialects so that you don't have to be an expert to do that, and you know how to reach them through advertising, and you reach them why they're saying that. So, how we do it, obviously we need to collect a lot of data where customers make that connection. The consumers, so it's a lot of consumer-generated content in response to the brand, right? So, in the case of high fashion, it's like, what's the consumer's response to an image of a model, right? Or how do they respond to the fashion show? How do they talk about clothing with each other, in social media? So we collect all that data. We do some analysis, obviously. One, to determine, is it actually domain relevant? Are they still talking about high fashion? Or did they go off and talk about, their summer in the Hamptons or whatever? But then we actually extract the perceptions, right? So the idea of what are they actually saying? I mean, what did this, how did I respond to it? And then once we've done that, we've got the consumer perceptions. Then we relate it back both to the overall domain, right? How are we mapping? But then the entities within it, right? How do they view different brands? How do they view different products within that brand? And then, overall assortments for retailers. We talked about perceptions. We gather those because language has structure, right? I mean, that's how we communicate to each other. And it's obviously got hundreds of structures to communicate different things. It's the communication of perception is the one that we've focused on first. So, here's the example. I've talked about it. There's a lot going on in these simple sentences, right? But the idea of, they want an emotional connection, right? But they're using up perception words that we normally associate with physical senses, right? Like I'm looking out at the audience, right? That's a physical thing. But in this case, this particular writer is using it to establish a mental image, right? That's their perception, and it's emotional perception here, right? Same way with it feels, right? Like John feels this. Didn't make him feel romantic, hopefully, but he feels this, right? But it's the consumer. This is their connection, right? And there's some technical terms for it at the bottom, but really it's the consumer's mental perception, how they're connecting, right? So here's the example in high fashion, right? Why is this garment romantic, right? It turns out that the reason the consumer perceives this, and some people might know this, probably Soledad knew all of this, but I didn't. I'm more a Joe Sixpack kind of guy. But so this is, the technology told me all of this, right? Is that actually, because this is symmetrical, that's actually kind of figure flattering, right? The fact that the shirring and another word I learned, but the shirring and the actual slight ruffles, you give it a softness along with the silk. It's perceived as feminine, right? The actual flowing part, more gentleness. The hint of translucence in the train adds a flair of mystery. I mean, this is all kind of the mental image, right? I mean, these words sound strange to me coming out of my mouth, but this is all things I learned. All right. And so here's another example, right? So bohemian, right? I mean, everyone understands this concept visually, right? But, in understanding why you perceive it is what we've been doing, right? So the fact that it's no longer is perfectly symmetrical, right? That the color lines bleed into each other, that there's a little less shape in the garment, the fact that the colors are more bold and earthy. All of this actually gives someone the emotional connection, perception as bohemian, right? They don't necessarily stand alone, right? So I showed you kind of a kind of strict example of romantic bohemian. This one is mostly romantic, a little bit of bohemian, a little bit of asymmetry. It's mostly symmetrical, mostly figure flattering, but it adds a little bit of asymmetrical elements. It brings out some details in floral, so it's a little more earthy. And I can, if I want to turn up my bohemian to 11, like John did for his wedding, this is not his bride, but she wore a similar dress, is that, I can just add some more earthiness, right? Some more floral elements, a lot more color, but retaining that same, the same materials.
So
what?
Yeah.
Okay, so what, John? All right. Yeah, so we talked before about, okay, that's the perceptions we extracted, right? So when I said we tie it back to the domain, the biggest thing is trend, right? So bohemian in high fashion is actually a recently emergent trend. You've probably, now that if you didn't know this before, now that I have said it, maybe you'll think about the emergence of all the patterns and the kind of bohemian elements that you see in clothing nowadays. Right? That wasn't always there, but so we can measure kind of when it started and measure its strength. And then we can also compare, where a particular brand sits against the overall consumer perception of the industry, of the domain at a point in time. Right? And you'll see kind of what we found to be what was driving the perceptions in Q4 of last year. And this is just one brand's map to it, right? How we compared. So another example is a simple example of e-commerce, right? But so if I want something bohemian today, right, I can't go and really search for bohemian on a retailer site, and that it's mostly literal text search, right? And so I may get whatever the advertiser or the marketing copywriter put in there that said bohemian in it, when really I want those bohemian elements, right? And it works the other way. If I'm shopping for like a blouse or a woman's top, I can use words like bohemian or romantic to guide me along the features that I might want, or in my case, that I think my girlfriend might want, right? And similarly, right, we use it, you can see that any application where you might need to understand why, or how to reach a consumer's perception, right, or that whole interaction, right, yeah. They warned me this, so you guys, you get to experience it. This is the modern hook. So it's the other applications, right? And for you guys, that semantic setting concept, right? Use it, right? It just make me talk louder too. No, eventually they'll cut my mic off, right? But yeah, so use it. There's other content than social, and that's it.
Thank you.
All right, thanks guys.